Thank you for joining us. This is Brave New History. I'm here with Dex Desjardins. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do.
Fantastic. And Chalice Blythe. All right, wonderful. So we're talking with the Satanic Temple. And I watched the documentary. It's pretty powerful. I'm sure a lot of people are probably familiar with the Satanic Temple from the documentary. Could we maybe start with background on it and your philosophy, behind Satanism and what interests you in it?
Sure. You want to go first, Shalise?
Oh, well, here, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Shalise Blythe. I have been a member of the Satanic Temple since roughly 2014. Currently a minister of Satan, as well as public media relations specialist. I do a whole lot of other things as well within the temple. And that's I've had a wide array of roles within the Satanic Temple. I first joined in 2014 after I'd heard about the first attempt at installing the Baphomet Statue at the Oklahoma State House next to the Ten Commandment statue. And that really fascinated me, really interested me in what they were doing. And so I kind of started following them, got to know the people, and decided to become a member a little bit afterwards after doing a lot of research on who these weirdos were. And so throughout my time with TST, I founded the first chapter in Utah back in 2016, and then in 2017 I stepped away from that role and went on to be a part of the administrative committee. It was called National Council at the time. Went on to be International Council after we started, building international chapters, and was on there for a very long time until about 2019. I've served as the director of the After School Satan Club campaign, and when I stepped away from International Council, I created Syrian Council, which is basically the human resources part of the organization. And once I got that all set up and got the people in there that are actual HR professionals and can handle the work, I took on the role as a member of our Ordination Council, which is the part of our organization that oversees the ministry, the ordainment of our ministers in the general ministry program. And I've been doing that ever since. And I also serve as programming director for the SatanCon campaign that we just started this year.
Yeah, and that's a convention?
Yeah. It's so we had our very first SatanCon in Scottsdale, Arizona this year back in February, and we consider it after a wild success and having Satanists come from all over the world to attend. We decided it should be an annual endeavor, so it's its own campaign, and we actually just barely announced 2023. So we will be holding SatanCon 2023 in Boston, Massachusetts, April 28th through the 30th. So we just announced that. You can Google it. It's up there. The website's up there. Tickets are available to purchase. You don't necessarily have to be a Satanist if you're interested in seeing what we have to offer. So, that's exciting. So we've been that literally just got announced today. So I've been dealing with that all day.
There you go. Breaking news here.
Yep.
Good deal. Yeah, and Dex, what's your background with the Church of Satan?
So I first joined the Satanic Temple back in 2015, so a year after Shalise. For me, I had heard about some of TST's various campaigns and activities, but the thing that really got me paying attention was the unveiling of our Baphomet statue at this large event in Detroit. It was the week after that I finally took the plunge and joined. I'd been dabbling in Satanism for a while before that, but hadn't really found a home because the the Church of Satan, which has been around since '66, didn't really speak to me. And I felt that the philosophies of the Satanic Temple were much more in line with my own. So, since that time, I was the founder of the Albany chapter, now Albany Congregation, which is still running. I also served on International Council for a spell. I am currently also on Ordination Council with Shalise, and I'm also serving in the role of Media Relations Specialist, which is, part of why I'm talking to you. So yeah, it's been an interesting, 7 years. Wow. That's a long time. In TST world, that's like a geological age. We've only been around for 9 years at this point. So yeah, it's really been something.
Yeah. So we had the Church of Satan. That was Anton LaVey, yeah?
Yeah, the Church of Satan was founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey, and it's still around. It certainly has its own philosophy, has its own organizational structure, has its own community. Not a whole lot of overlap, between the two. Outside of, there are some people in TST who actually are former members of the Church of Satan. That's where they used to call Satanism their home for a long time. And for a long time, it was really the only really organized religious, the only satanic religious organization that existed. So, as Satanism was perceived and practiced, really was just what Anton LaVey had codified. But as with anything, things evolve. How we understand life evolves. How we understand how we apply general philosophy to our understanding of the world tends to evolve. So the Satanic Temple is kind of just like the natural evolution from what the Church of Satan founded. Kind of where Satanism as a religious practice and identity started, and kind of evolved that from, elements of LaVeyan Satanism that, people don't tend to agree with, whether that's the foundations of the, survival of the fittest mentality, the might is right mentality, or some of the Ayn Randian concepts that LaVey, very famously, took and implemented into his own philosophy and the foundations of Church of Satan philosophy. Kind of took those, removed those, and added other elements. And so they have their tenets. We have ours. We have our 7 tenets. We perceive, the tenets to be a reflection of a more evolved application and understanding of what Satanism can be as a religious practice. So, but yeah, both still currently exist. If people think of Satanism, they tend to immediately imagine, Anton LaVey, the very intense man with the shaved head, usually with a serpent around his shoulders, and people tend to be introduced to Satanism through, the Satanic Bible, the Satanic Witch, the Satanic Rituals. Those were all written by Anton LaVey. So yeah, when it comes to the history of Satanism, where our foundations are and where that started, yes, absolutely. Church of Satan is where it began, and it's still in practice. But I think with any religious with any religious thought, there tends to come a time where, people evolve, our understanding of life evolves, understanding of ourselves evolves, and, we feel like the Satanic Temple is merely a natural evolution of satanic thoughts. So.
Yeah. And, oh yeah, were you about to say something, Dex?
Oh, I was going to say, would it be helpful for us to sort of define what Satanism means to both the Church of Satan and ourselves in sort of broad terms?
Yeah, for sure.
So the elevator speech I usually give is that Satanism is a non-theistic religion that uses the central symbol of Satan as presented in literature as the metaphor around which we build our ethos. So Satan for us is not a literal devil. It's not a spiritual entity. We don't believe in any of that stuff: spells, souls, God, afterlife, in general, anything supernatural sort of falls outside of our belief system. So for us, Satan, and not the biblical Satan that doesn't actually exist in the Bible, because Satan, as Christians mostly these days understand it, is sort of an amalgamation of different stories from the Old and New Testament that we've decided is a singular being. But nowhere in the Bible does it actually say there is a devil named Satan and he rules hell. That is a fairly recent phenomenon. You've got the beast in Revelations, obviously, which I think is what most people think of. But then some of the other stories that define that Satan for Christians mostly come from the Old Testament, and Jews don't believe in the devil. I know this, I am myself from that background. So for us, Satan comes from works of the Romantic era authors such as Anatole France, Mary Shelley's in there, John Milton, obviously. So it's the Promethean hero that brings enlightenment. Basically, that's what we're talking about. So it's a symbol of personal liberation, the pursuit of knowledge, and rebellion against arbitrary authority. It's not the spooky, scary, Halloweeny devil that people think we worship.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wonder, what is Satan? Because, in Genesis, they never identify the serpent as Satan. And he doesn't torture people in hell. According to Revelation, if I remember right, it's actually Jesus who is squishing people in a giant wine press in hell. Not Satan. If I remember, I might be mistaken, but I think that's my memory of it. But and then in Mark, he tempts Jesus, worship me and everything will be yours, which is a little bit odd to me because Satan isn't supposed to rule the world, right? Or does he? I don't know in Mark. So it's I'm not sure who Satan is really in the Bible.
Well, I mean, if you look at the history, or if you even just kind of look at the word itself, Satan just means adversary. And adversary can mean so many different things depending on the narrative of which you're trying to apply it. So whether that's a cultural Satan, whether that's a personal Satan, whether that's a historical Satan, Satan being the adversary, whether that's viewed as a positive or a negative thing, just utilizing your own example of, the serpent in the meadow. The serpent, that is commonly referred to as, Satan tempting Eve. You could very well see that story as, the serpent being a stand-in for the want of liberation and the want for knowledge and the seeking of that, the very human instinct to seek more, to want more, and curiosity and things like that. Or if we want to believe the Jesus myth and see Satan as the maybe the either worship me or believe in me, or quit suffering in the name of this God and actually go towards something that brings you pleasure, brings you liberation from your suffering. I mean, doesn't have to be a literal Satan for that to be almost like that inner voice that tells you that maybe instead of blind fealty to this thing that brings you nothing but suffering, why don't you instead do something that brings you joy, happiness, fulfillment, things like that. So so generally speaking, in Satanism, because we see Satan as the literary metaphor, we don't rely on the Satan as defined by Christians who've never read the Bible or various myths. I mean, Satan really is it's just a representation, a name to be applied, or a representation of what I think is a very human spirit of either rebellion, seeking more, defiance, obtaining that which you are not allowed to do. That's a very human instinct, and whatever that means, whether it's representative of a real historical figure or a literary figure or whatever that is, Satan is just representative of those things. So, that's why, we talk about non-theistic Satanism, because yes, do people commonly associate that with the, the general Christian idea, or even like the Hollywood idea of what a Satan is? Yeah, of course, there's always going to be that association, culturally speaking, but that isn't what that means to us, even though we do find it very funny in some regards, and we do kind of play around it. We're very cheeky about it, and kind of utilize a lot of the iconography and see it as representing of us, but not in any sense that it's a real deity.
Yeah, which the idea of saying you don't need to suffer, right? You can kind of go beyond what, with the garden thing, right? It makes you wonder, right? Like, with Satan as the serpent, right? Like, I don't know, like as a counterpoint to like theism, right? And do you think of like, would theism be precluded under Satanism, do you think?
So that's a tricky question. So, I mean, for Satanists of the TST and for the most part, Church of Satan variety, we are non-theistic. We do not believe in the existence of a deity, God, or any other. There are Satanists who have theistic beliefs or who worship Lucifer, for example, the fallen angel, and they tend to call themselves Luciferians, not Satanists. But there are, of course, people out there who just worship the devil, but they're mostly edgelord metalheads who are trying to be cool, I think.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. You'll be cool.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that when we say we're a non-theistic religion, that seems to boggle a lot of people's minds, and they say, well, how can you have religion without God? And from an American or Western European standpoint, I understand where that's coming from. It's because it's almost impossible, I think, in the American mind to separate the two concepts of religion and God. But if you look historically and around the world, there have been quite a few non-theistic religions, and are still today. Jainism, for example, doesn't have a deity. There's a sort of life force, but it's not something you worship or that can intervene in your life. Many forms of Buddhism are non-theistic. There's humanistic Judaism, which I've never heard anyone say is not a religion, but they don't have God. So it's difficult to get people to come to grips with this. So, I mean, we have people in our membership who have theistic or supernatural beliefs, but it's not something that the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple teaches or thinks of as dogma.
Yeah, and you wonder, like, especially like with you coming from a Jewish background, I've always wondered how it is in Judaism, where, I mean, I come from an evangelical background, where the whole idea of like the serpent, right, which I don't equate with Satan, because I think it never says that. There's no reason to think that, at least in my opinion, that's what the authors intended. And I presume that's what it's in Judaism. The serpent isn't equated with Satan, right?
Yeah, well, in Judaism there is no unified being of Satan. Satan.
It doesn't even exist. So yeah, right. How could it be? Yeah.
So if you're a Torah observant Orthodox Jew and you believe that the creation story is literally true, which even most Orthodox Jews don't take literally the way that a lot of Christians do. To them, the serpent is literally exactly what the Bible says it is, a serpent that could speak and had legs. And God takes those things away from him and makes him crawl in the dirt after tempting Adam and Eve. So it's just a one-time character that pops up for that one story and is never heard from again in Judaism.
Yeah. And then there's the bit where the serpent says, well, so Hashem says, well, no, you can't eat from that tree because on that day you will die. And the serpent says, no, you won't die. You'll be like gods, knowing good from evil. And that's exactly what happens. But then, like, I was brought up to say, well, the serpent is lying. But did they die that day? and they did learn good from evil that day, right? And so, I mean, is that, do you think, what the authors intended? Like a kind of a nod towards the serpent was right and Hashem is lying?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never actually sat and thought about that part of it. Wow, that's something I'll have to kind of read around about. I've got a number of Torahs with rabbinical commentary I should grab and see what they've said about that, because I actually have never had that particular discussion. I'm still close with and regularly talk to several rabbis, including Orthodox ones, and it's really interesting to actually talk about the concept of Hashem, of God, with them, and how ill-defined it is compared to in Christianity. I was in a class led by an Orthodox rabbi recently, and he asked who are the atheists in the crowd, and so I put my hand up, and he's like, "What don't you believe in?" I'm like, "God." He's like, "What is?" He's like, "What is that?" And so I'm like, anthropomorphic, sky man kind of. And they're like, he's like, "Where does it say that in the scripture?" I'm like, "I guess it in the Jewish scripture." I'm like, "Well, it doesn't." And he's like, "To me, God is the sum total of all the forces of the universe over which humanity has no control." He's like, "Do you believe that you can control all the forces of the universe, gravity, whether an asteroid hits the earth or not, the fact that we die?" I'm like, "Well, no." He's like, "Okay, then in my eyes, you're not an atheist."
Yeah. Which, I mean, he's almost like explicitly saying God of the gaps without telling me God of the gaps without telling me, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, we're because we're Satanists, we're inherently not atheists, because atheism is what you're not. So I think he was right in two ways without knowing he was right in two ways.
Yeah. And have some comments here if we want to take comments so quick, or questions, or both.
Sure.
And kind of on the same lines that I'm thinking of, Gnosticism, right? If we're familiar with Gnosticism, where, kind of along those same lines, like we think of, like, kind of from a broad view, there's the monad, there's like this unknowable thing that exists, not a person, but is it a person? Like completely unknowable, completely different from what we can understand. And from that emanates certain things, right? Logos, Sophia, those are the principal eons, right? And kind of as you get further and further removed, you get the demiurge, right? Who is, Hashem, essentially, right? He thinks there's no other gods beside him, and he's kind of jealous, and he wants people to worship him, and he doesn't know, like, there's a plot hole in Genesis where the waters are pre-existing, right? And he doesn't know where the waters came from. There's the primordial chaos. And so he's actually more of Satan, the bad guy. And he doesn't know that there's this higher thing. And I don't know. I think like there's this unknowable thing where we came from, we'll call that the monad. And then there's the demiurge below it, right? Who we try to escape from, right? And thinking that he's the one God, he's the good guy. But so anyway, first comment here. This is from Nathan, Spiritual Level of Being. That's his YouTube channel. Great guy. And Satanists can be beautiful people. I mean, as evidenced by our guests, right? Guests, plural. Fun fact, Yahweh killed way more people and sure loved his virgin sacrifices. So it seemed like God would be the devil. I wonder how Satanists feel about Gnostics. No strong feelings, or?
I mean, I guess Gnosticism is not necessarily my forte. I know the general definition of what Gnosticism is, but I myself have not looked a lot into it. So that comment is interesting of, associating, God being the actual devil. But we actually see, the character of Satan as being the good guy. So, associating the devil with negative things is actually something that we kind of have the opposite view of. It's, we see everything that Satan represents, especially if you look at the fact that if you're going to believe the story of, the original, fallen angel, why is Satan the fallen angel? Well, because he defied God, because he defied tyranny, because he, despite the insurmountable odds, despite the fact that in the end, in that story, there was an acknowledgement that he'd lose. There's that saying, better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Seeing God as this evil tyrant, and Satan defying that. And if you look to the story of being representative of man's temptation into things that are inherently bad. What's inherently bad about knowledge? What's inherently bad about seeking pleasure? Things that that are good. Satan really is representative of the hero and the better elements of ourselves as humans. And God is actually what I would consider to be the evil, tyrannical, the absolute fucking monster, that God can really represent. And, some would define that as love, but I think it's the opposite. I think Satan, if you believe that story and, what people associate, the character of Satan to be, that was actually the ultimate acknowledgement of humanness and, bringing, goodness and good things to humanity. So that's kind of, so yeah, I don't see God as the devil. I see God as God. And, that to me, is the evil. The devil was the good guy, the hero. And, and I think, especially if you take away these, elements of, what you see in the media, what you see in, people who probably never read a Bible, what they define Satan and what that is associated with, all the things that people want to put on Satanists as their doings, inherently is never true. Especially since we had the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely coming back, with, QAnon and things like that. But, everything that we have always been associated with in these really horrendous ways have never been anything that has actually been a tenet or a belief or something that, Satanists have ever done. But they sure are things that have been done in the name of God and Christianity. So I think a lot of that is merely projection on their part. But anyway, that's that rant. And to answer the second question, I don't feel like I have enough understanding of Gnosticism to have an opinion about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And here along the same line of thought, this is Nathan, spiritual level of being. The devil and Satan are two different characters. You're correct, and the Jews don't believe in the devil. Also correct, he's an angel that serves God to seduce mankind away from God, so man has free will. So that's an interesting concept, which is how could you seduce someone without free will? So you'd think that that would be a requisite, right? Because how would you do that if you don't have free will? Yeah, the idea of the devil and Satan being two different characters. So we'll take that as more of a comment, maybe, unless you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I had a thought on something that while you were speaking there, which is something that never made sense to me about the Genesis story in the fall of Adam and Eve was, God is basically punishing people for something they could not yet understand. They didn't have knowledge of good and evil. So how can you punish them for doing something that they did not understand was evil?
Yeah.
I never quite grasped how that story is supposed to work.
Yeah. I've heard it expressed that the 10 Commandments exist to teach people right from wrong, right? But then you have the global flood when they couldn't have possibly followed it, right? And apparently didn't know right from wrong because they didn't have the 10 Commandments. So it's weird to flood the entire world. I think, I don't know, but yeah, that's a good point. And here's another one from Nathan. Eventually, we'll have some comments that are not Nathan here. Have you heard of the Bogomils? They believe Satan was God's oldest son that created the material world, but lost his powers after seducing Eve. I've heard the name, but I'm not super familiar with their philosophy.
No, I don't know that one either.
Okay.
No.
Something to look into.
Yeah.
For sure. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, just saying that's something I think worth looking into for me, you know.
Yep, for sure. And then here, I skipped ahead here. My first boyfriend was the reverend of a satanic church in Australia 20 years ago. Lovely guy. Every so often, he'd have 10 people for reading, chanting, and hailing Satan. All right, brilliant.
Yeah, very cool.
And let's see. Okay, Job. Someone tricked God into giving Job a pretty bad time, which that's a little bit interesting. Like I've heard the original doesn't say like, I bet they'll fall away from you, or I bet Job will, be seduced or whatever by, you have all these plagues put on him and he'll stop believing in God, right? That the original said that he'll still bless you after all of this, right? So it's kind of a different take on that. But any thoughts on Job?
I just found the story to be sort of, indicative of a God that was kind of arbitrary and capricious. Like why would a supposedly omnipotent and omniscient God need to prove anything to anybody? Angel or devil or human or whatever. It just, I don't know. It seems like a schoolyard trick.
It does, doesn't it? Like he's the biggest big guy in the world, right? So why would you need to listen to somebody else to prove that you're a big deal?
Yeah, it's almost as if he had to prove his own worth as opposed to anybody else, right? And needless suffering for what? The whims of a God that felt like he had to, whip his dick out and measure it. It's kind of how I see that story.
Yep. All right. So it's an intellectual trip. Exactly. All right. And LaVey was a libertarian, in my opinion. Yeah. I mean, Ayn Rand, that's like, he was kind of like the first guy to do it, but it does seem kind of weird to associate Ayn Rand and Satan.
Well, to understand LaVey, you have to understand the time and who the person was, right? So Anton LaVey, he was a magician, he was a carny, he was his real true story will never really be known by anybody who's currently alive, because he does have a biography out there, but most of it's horseshit. It's all made up. But that's kind of the fun. That's kind of the fun of LaVey. His mystery and what made LaVey so magical and such a character was because it doesn't matter that basically his entire backstory is made up. Like you believe that if it were true that actually happened. So he and he was really interested in various philosophies. He was really interested in magic and the underground and the occult. And so utilizing things like perceiving Satan as being representative of human man as animal. I think from somebody who was born in the 1920s makes sense. different time, different viewpoint. What was satanic and what was considered to be the ultimate, offense to the norm. It hit different and looked different at the time. So when you think about, so he did not believe in literal Satan, not a literal deity, to be worshipped. He regarded Satan as the ultimate symbol of the adversary, a metaphor for true rebellion. And he was inspired by Western esotericism and Aleister Crowley, and his work with like the OTO and things like that, sex magic as well. And he did draw the inspiration from, social theories from Ayn Rand and Ragnar Redbeard's Midas Right. Midas Right was came out of the 1890s, and it espouses an extreme interpretation of social Darwinism, and it essentially puts forth this idea of survival of the fittest to mean that only strength or physical might establish moral right. Kind of denies the idea of human rights, and says that people who are weak should be viewed with contempt. And it's got a lot of other weird stuff, but those are kind of like the elements that LaVey kind of took over and saw Satan as representative of man, the animal, man, the carnal, man, the Satan within us. What Satan represents is, the unbowed will. Satan represents the absolute, basic, the basic of what a human is, which is the animal, and and does not need a god or does not need these other things to have good morals, have good way of life, and lead one's life in a good way. And then of course with Ayn Rand, kind of took her philosophy of like radical individualism. Because obviously as she was writing her work, it was a reaction against what she saw as the evils of communism, and he took a lot of stuff from The Virtue of Selfishness and Atlas Shrugged. So you would say that I'm trying to put it the best way. So, man worship, exaltation of man's self-esteem and the sacredness of his happiness on earth. So those are the elements that really inspired LaVey, and how he conceptualized what a Satan could be, what Satan represented. And so he wrote a lot of his philosophy and a lot of other things. I mean, the thing about Satanism that people have to understand is that as a religious philosophy, he was the one that created that. Prior to Anton LaVey, what was considered satanic, what was considered, Satanism, people believing witches worship Satan or things like that, and they were the Satanists. That didn't actually really happen, didn't really exist. But what did happen is esotericism, occultism, magic, things like that. There were a lot of underground societies and a lot of underground occult practices and practitioners that, believed in a lot of things that, in turn became a lot of elements of inspiration for Satanism because they were subversive. And, and I think they really did speak to LaVey's need for showmanship. So yeah, a lot of those elements were drawn in and created, by LaVey. So those are the elements there. And yeah, I think that people who still believe in those things and still espouse what the Church of Satan still preaches, I mean, they haven't really veered away from any of it. I mean, he did write a Bible, and once you write a Bible and you base a religion off of it, you kind of, and then of course, once you're dead, people just say, okay, this is the word and this is how it's going to be in perpetuity. Yeah, they tend to kind of fall within, I guess, that libertarian mindset. But, back in the 60s, that was, it could have been considered right. Well, I mean, not leftism. I mean, it was radical. It was groundbreaking. It was revolutionary. considering the culture and where society as a whole was at that time. But yeah, we see it more as, just a bunch of edgelords in black now, but that's because our society has changed.
Yeah, I was thinking. Oh, I'm sorry.
Huh?
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, just like, our views on things like, might is right, things about how we can, social Darwinism has been completely disproven at this point. And man worship, self worship, those things don't inherently have to just be solely focused on the individual. It can have an outreach of the things that you do in the world can be self-serving, but can also have a greater impact and serve, that without you. Because at the end of the day, the impact that you have on the world and the impact that you have within the society and the community around you, ultimately to your own wellness and your own well-being. So that's kind of how things have evolved in thought. And then, we do, and, so, therein comes the Satanic Temple having a very different view of Satanism. But, the elements that are obviously there, Satan as the adversary, not a literal deity, representative of, very, very human things, but also claiming that sorry, I gotta drink some water, else I'm gonna lose my voice. Anyways, I've been talking too long. Dex, did you want to finish your thought?
Yeah, you started to cover it with how TST has moved away from, the Randianism and social Darwinism. That's one of the biggest differences between us and the Church of Satan as far as philosophy goes. And something that someone else pointed out to me one time is that the sort of Randian libertarian might is right kind of stuff that people had traditionally associated with Satanism through LaVey has become sort of a major part of a lot of people's evangelical Christianity. So we're at a point now where a lot of the Church of Satan's beliefs and a lot of the beliefs of evangelical Christians have become indistinguishable. It's really weird, like abortion stances and not being the opposite of socially egalitarian and stuff like that. So it kind of makes me think the Church of Satan's philosophy is just kind of run its course when you have more in common with evangelical Christians than you have with other Satanists.
Yeah, though I was kind of thinking the same thing, where if we talk about might makes right, or with religious fundamentalism, that why is God the boss? Well, he can crush you. Well, so how does that make him the boss, right? Like, well, because he's the boss. He's the strongest, right?
Yeah,
that's kind of we're not that far off from fundamentalism there.
Yeah, he who wields the power to destroy is God, and that can be, it doesn't have to be a theistic point of view. That can be an individual's point of view about themselves. I have the mentality, the physical strength, the mentality, the whatever that makes me capable of ultimate destruction. Therefore, I am alpha.
It's the cosmological version of an abusive relationship. Do what I say or I'll hit you. Or, then you add Jesus to the mix and it's, I love you forever until you do that wrong thing. And then it's, look what you made me do.
Yeah, it's basically just, gaslighting as a religious philosophy.
Yeah. Which is a little bit true that like the religious mystery behind it as unknowable, maybe we can look at that as a bit of gaslighting, right? Well, you just don't really understand it, right? Which I know is the Calvinists' favorite thing to say when they're defending their beliefs. Well, you just don't understand. But let's see. Maybe we'll hit up another comment here. The Gnostics saw the snake as the good guy. There's a scene in the Gospel of Judas that Jesus said that the serpent in the garden was the serpent in the garden that woke up humanity. Yeah, that's a common Gnostic interpretation, where they don't see Satan as the serpent, but as Sophia or Christ. and was just trying to wake people up from demiurge, like worshiping the demiurge, right? Like, this is what you're seeing is all illusory, right? That there's like a truer God, right? That's kind of light, right? Let's see here. All right, here we have a new guy in the comments. Hi, everyone. How did you find Satanism? Did you look into other religions or philosophies before choosing this one for yourselves? And did you come from religious upbringings?
Yeah, so I was raised what I call very generic Christian within the household. We did not subscribe to any particular Christian viewpoint outside of more emphasis on the New Testament as opposed to the Old Testament. So hellfire, brimstone, a lot of the Old Testament things were never something that were really pushed upon. There was a lot of humanistic elements to what I was taught. And I was also raised in Utah. So even though I wasn't raised Mormon, I was raised Mormon, culturally Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that I was brought up with. And I had, by the time I was about 11 or 12 years old, I had already, given up on the idea of God and church and all those things. I lost my faith at a very young age for various reasons. And, I wasn't searching for a religious identity after that. I was perfectly fine with, considering myself somebody who didn't believe in a God, didn't believe in those teachings, didn't really have a need to answer any of those big questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Things like that. Just they weren't pressing to me. I didn't really need them. And so when I was about 16, I had actually been introduced to Satanism via reading the Satanic Bible. I can't remember how I came across it, but I was starting to listen to a lot of bands that were like really referencing, Satanism, occultism, things like that. So I was able to pick up a copy of the Satanic Bible, and I read it, and it was mind blowing. It was absolutely amazing. And even though after reading it and feeling really inspired by the words of Anton LaVey and what he was espousing in the book. At that point, I didn't consider myself a Satanist. I just thought, oh, this is just a really interesting philosophy, and I really like these ideas. And, I'm glad that I essentially can be validated with things I already feel, because somebody else put that work out there. And through the years, I actually became acquainted with people who were part of the Church of Satan, and really, really disliked them and really disliked the community. So I just had horrendous experiences with anybody who associated with the Church of Satan. So even though, again, I held Anton LaVey very near and dear to my heart, and some of the other works that I read, Satanic Witch was a really interesting read. I think it's all nonsense now, but for somebody, for a girl, growing up in Utah and reading some of the things that were in there, I mean, again, mind-blowing, very liberating ideas. So those are the things I took with it. But I did not consider myself a Satanist. Because how it was practiced and that community just did not speak to me in any way. So it wasn't until the Satanic Temple came around, and I was I found myself really interested in what they were doing, with their campaign, the Baphomet Statue campaign, and really looking into the beliefs and how they were contextualizing Satanism, via the 7 tenets. And if you go in their FAQ, how they talked about, what does Satan actually represent? What is the inspiration? And it just clicked. There was just something about reading this, essentially this new interpretation of what Satanism can be. it just clicked. I call Satanism my coming home religion, because I really did feel like, once I saw that Satanism can be this thing that checked every box of everything that I already believed and felt. And I did more digging into other works that weren't just the Satanic Bible. Like, I was reading more of the, from the Romantic Satanists, Percy Shelley, and, I read the Anatole France, and, it was starting to see these things that really touched on some other works that I had, read that actually, I grew up in science fiction, and I might as well have been calling myself a Satanist at the time, because science fiction is, it is some of the most liberating literature you can read. That's that's where like every taboo, every revolutionary thought, is, it's all in there. I mean, it's all in science fiction. And, so it's harkening on some of the things I had read in science fiction, and things that really spoke to me in that realm. And, it just, once the interpretation of Satanism became more than just what Anton LaVey said, that's when I knew, okay, I'm a Satanist. I've always been a Satanist, but now I feel, now that there's validation there, that Satanism can be more than just what this one person and this one organization has, defines it to be. That for me was what cemented it. So yeah, I've been a Satanist ever since, but it was a long journey, and, I feel like there's always so much more to learn, in that, because, there's so much more that has inspired, satanic thought, and, where we take a lot of our history and a lot of our customs and things from. So much more to learn. But yeah, that's generally my general timeline of how I got here.
Yeah.
My story is a little different. Like I said, come from a Jewish background, and I started to move away from that religious tradition when my beliefs started to fall out of line with Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, which, I'm not sure if you're familiar with those or not, but they, things like, I believe that Hashem is the creator of all life, and blah, blah, blah. So, and if you're not familiar with the term Hashem, it literally means the name, and it's what Torah observant Jews generally refer to God as in conversation. So I decided to kind of detach from that community, and because I felt like a fraud there. And so I went through a spiritual crisis where I started dabbling in various forms of paganism and stuff, and, like witchcraft kinds of things. And I thought it was cool, but ultimately I realized I didn't really believe in that either. So I drifted. And then when I, started to get into Satanism, I actually picked up a Satanic Bible at a thrift shop for 25 cents. And that's how I first got introduced to that. Yeah. And then, like I said, when TST came around and got on my radar, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, here's a community I think I can get on board with. Now, having said all of that, I have since realized that I never actually had to leave my old religious community. And while I still do not, abide by the 13 Principles of Faith or things like that, I have very firmly reestablished my connection with that community. Like I said, I'm friendly with a few rabbis. I sometimes attend synagogue services or holiday services just to keep that connection alive. And people know, that I'm a Satanist, and it simply does not matter to them. Because in Judaism, it really doesn't matter what you believe. It's frankly irrelevant. Faith is a thing that Jews never talk about. It is a term that has no religious significance in Judaism whatsoever. What they care about is praxis. What do you do? Do you follow the mitzvot, the commandments? And not like the 10 commandments. Well, them too, but things like, eating kosher and stuff like that. The various rules around Shabbat and things like that. That's what's important in Judaism, not what you believe. And there's quite a few rabbis out there who will tell you they're quite agnostic on the existence of a theistic God. So I guess what I'm saying there is I probably could have kept that community connection, but I'm happy where I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And a comment, I see Hashem as Lucifer. I don't think I think the V is a typo there. But which, I mean, it's interesting. Like, we have like the fall where, I mean, if we're kind of in Gnostic thought, there's like the fall in the pleroma, which is essentially heaven, right? And like the God that we know kind of fell, and that's how we get the material world, right? Which we can kind of see the parallels with Satan, kind of under like a Christian viewpoint. And yeah, let's hit up the next one. Is self-realization the main goal in Satanism? Do you talk about self-realization, or is that kind of?
I mean, there's parts of it. I think people come into Satanism for their very own reasons. One's form of Satanism can be completely different than anybody else who calls themselves a Satanist. Even within the TST community, what people define as their personal Satanism can look very different, and that has a lot of factors. Depending on whether they have dual identities, who their personal Satan is. Based off of their life experiences, what about Satanism speaks to them, on what level and why. It's a very individualistic religion in general. And because it's incredibly individualistic, when you have a community like, community of the Satanic Temple, a lot of the times when you talk to people about, their satanic practice, them agreeing on the 7 tenets is basically where their commonality ends. That's just like, that's where it starts and ends. And then everything else about their practice is just entirely different. How it informs what they do in life, their views on other things. So I guess the goal of Satanism, is to be something for the people of whom it speaks to. It's definitely not the goal to be for everybody. Satanism has no goal of, expanding or evangelizing or getting numbers. We don't offer salvation. We don't offer concrete answers. We don't offer anything like that. I mean, it's a philosophy that either works for you or it doesn't. It's an identity that either works for you or it doesn't. The reasons for why, it speaks to you, and why you identify as such, is probably as individualistic as people are, as unique as people are. So, I think generally there really isn't, I guess, a goal. There's a lot of not goals, which are kind of the things that I had touched on. But it is for those who it speaks to, and it's not for those whom it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the pursuit of knowledge is generally considered to be pretty important in Satanism. So I think, if self-realization is a form of knowledge, and I certainly think that is a thing that would certainly be in line with Satanism. I don't know if it's what everybody does. It's for me, I would say, yeah, I'm constantly self-reflecting, trying to better learn about myself and understand myself and how I function and why I function the way I do. And, figuring out what things will make me the most fulfilled person. So it can be. I wouldn't say it is universally.
Yeah. And I think maybe like just the pursuit of knowledge is probably the only common thing Satanism has, whether you're talking to somebody in the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple. I think that's a pretty common ideal that people have. But yeah, after that, it's all up to the person.
Yeah, definitely. And let's see, here's a good question. Laws are made for breaking.
We kind of have a tenet related to arbitrary law. So, what laws are we talking about? One, we do have a tenet about, when one should always seek justice, and justice should always prevail over the overwritten or spoken laws. I am brutally butchering that tenet. We've been here for almost a decade, and ask us to recite them off the top of our heads, and we can't. It's like because it's like if there's a website, you can just look it up. But laws are made for breaking. I mean, I guess it depends on the law, and because we live in the post Roe v. Roe v. Wade world, right? We live in a world where now it's against the law to be a trans person. It's, it could potentially tomorrow we'll find out it's against the law to be part of the LGBTQ community. It's against the law to have an abortion now. I mean, I think arbitrary laws that violate our autonomy and our pursuit of happiness. I mean, I think those should be challenged, because at the end of the day, justice should prevail, and sometimes you have to work towards that justice in defiance of these arbitrary laws. Whether that's God's law, whether that's man's law. And that's not to say all laws. I mean, there are some laws that are pretty good, when it comes to, like, we believe in, never harming children, there's, things like that, where it's not only a religious law for us, but, it's on the books and in a lot of places. And those are, I think we should definitely respect those laws. Those are good ones. When you're not causing harm to other people. But I think when it comes to this idea of, all laws should be broken, well, the arbitrary laws, and especially ones that are meant to oppress and take your natural rights away from you, that's those are ones to definitely work towards not adhering to.
Yeah. I've always had a sort of difficulty with rules and laws in general. You see the eye roll. But, again, like Shalice said, when the laws have to do with things like protecting people from harm, obviously, shouldn't be out there violently mugging people or committing rape and murder and stuff like that. But some of the other ones I kind of have a loose relationship with, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to all of us, especially considering the laws that are coming out that are essentially making it illegal to not be a white Christian conservative man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally see it as there's not really laws, there's vices and virtues, right? And reminds me of, just to harp on Gnosticism again, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where she says, don't give yourself additional laws or else you'll be bound by them, which I find powerful. I mean, I guess you'd have to read the text, right? But let's see here. Let's see. The Ophites viewed the serpent as being used as a conduit of Sophia to bring knowledge to Adam and Eve. Yeah. So there's the idea of Sophia as the serpent, as kind of like the first liberator, right? To try to wake people up. She's Hashem's mother that he forgot about. Oh my goodness! Look at all these things. I don't know if we'll hopefully we'll get to a good amount. Oh, and I think we said probably about an hour-ish. Do you guys have to go?
No.
All right. And let's see here. Do you guys have initiation rituals in TST?
They exist for people who want to do something like that, but we don't have any mandatory rituals at all. Ritual in Satanism is a highly individualistic thing that some people find great meaning in and love to take part in. And then there's folks like me who find them empty and without any value for myself. So I enjoy the theatrics of them, but I don't personally derive any pleasure or meaning from being a part of them. But we do have them on the books for people who like them.
Yeah. Some people, some people find ritual really cathartic and they engage in it almost on a daily basis. And there are others who just, it doesn't really do anything for them. So yeah, we're not like, other religious practices where to, I guess, be considered official, you have to do some kind of initiation or things like that. But some people, as a way of affirming their religious identity, they'll do, I don't know, either they'll have like a naming ritual, like maybe they'll have like a pseudonym that, represents their satanic identity. And it's almost like they're renaming themselves. And it's kind of like an affirmation of their new self, new identity. There are destruction rituals where people will do essentially a ritual centered around either the literal or a metaphorical destruction of former fealties, former points of view, former self, and kind of and affirming their new identities and affirming their new sense of self and their new beliefs. And I mean, it just kind of falls in between. I mean, there's so like destruction ritual is a really common one, and it's utilized for a lot of different purposes. But I have seen people utilize it as kind of like almost their initiation, I guess, into their new identity as a Satanist. Naming rituals, things like that. But again, it's not a requirement to be a Satanist. Neither in I don't think the Church of Satan has anything like that. TST certainly doesn't have anything like that. So, again, whatever is, whatever the individual determines is the best way to demonstrate either to themselves or others or however their inclusion, their identity,
It's a self-identification. It's a self-identification religion. So if you understand what Satanism is and you agree with those things, and you are comfortable calling yourself a Satanist internally or otherwise, then you're a Satanist. Congratulations.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Well, get your sticker in the mail in like 5 weeks or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Good deal. So here, Sobek, Lord of the Four Corners, I think he's, we touched on this previously, where Satanism could be thought of as Ayn Rand wearing devil horns, which, that is, that pretty much sums up LaVeyan Satanism.
Yeah, well, I mean, LaVey did make a comment about that, a very famous comment about that, essentially saying that his Satanism was just Ayn Rand with a little bit of magic. It's not a rude question. If people view Satanism that way, especially if they are looking more towards how like the Church of Satan practices Satanism, how they define Satanism, then that actually wouldn't be a rude thing to say. They'd be like, yeah, no, you get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we in the Satanic Temple, we very purposely kind of taken those elements out. We don't ascribe to them. We don't ascribe to the Might is Right or the Ayn Randian. Like we're devoid of that. So it's not an offensive or rude question just because there's a reason people would say that, because a very prominent Satanist said, yeah, it's just Ayn Rand with a little bit of magic, thrown in there, and and he's right. I mean, if you think about it, like, it's a common perception, and depending on who you're talking to, it's a correct perception. But for us, we don't, us meaning, members of TST, that would not be the case.
Yeah, until TST's founding in 2012-13, that would be pretty universally correct about Satanism.
Yeah, generally speaking, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, and there's a scene in the Mayan Popol Vuh where a young woman approached a forbidden fruit tree. In the tree are skulls of dead ancestors that tell her about immortality, then impregnate her by spitting.
Cool.
Gotcha. So there's, I guess maybe this is, well, I don't know, maybe an alternate telling of the Genesis narrative. And so we touched on the Baphomet statue.
Mm-hmm.
So my understanding of Baphomet is ultimately a corruption of the word Muhammad, right? From the Templar going on their crusades, and they came into depictions of Muhammad and brought it back, and they were accused of worshiping Baphomet. Does anybody know any of the story of Baphomet?
So that's kind of right. So in the context of Satanism and Baphomet, to kind of understand that, kind of have to understand where Satanism draws a lot of its inspiration. And when you think about Satanism, we kind of parse it into proto-Satanism, classical Satanism, and contemporary. Contemporary is where it starts with Anton LaVey. Classical Satanism is kind of the era where a lot of the magicians, a lot of the, the Crowleys, the Eliphas Levis, the, people that were really into like occult magic and occult practice, were building these concepts and these elements of which, LaVey took a lot of inspiration from, and where, even we take some inspiration from. Proto-Satanism is, way more far back, where there are elements of things ascribed to being satanic by people who didn't identify as Satanists, but are, really blasphemous, very underground, very occult practices and philosophies that, inspire satanic thought. So Baphomet in the context of Satanism, it's a Vedic goat, and our Baphomet is a little bit different than the traditional Baphomet. So you think of Baphomet, you've got the, half goat, half man, you got the breasts, and then you have the phallus. And then of course with our Baphomet statue, there's the goat head, and then of course the male chest, and or I guess the chest that has no breasts. I don't want to ascribe gender to it. View Baphomet as being non-binary. Being a they, because there's, all these opposing elements, in one icon. So, the original Baphomet that people tend to think of actually is sort of kind of what I have back here a little bit. It's appeared in an illustration in Eliphas Levi's book Dogma and Ritual of High Magic. It contains, contrasting elements representing the symbolization of the equilibrium of opposites. So, to achieve that, there was the dualistic, and opposing features like half human, half animal, male, female, good, evil, salve, coagula, other symbology like that. So, this came from a very, people who are practicing magic at the time. But, there's the pentagram on the forehead. There's, indications of opposites, kind of being in harmony with one another. It's been a really important figure in Thelema, which was, established by Aleister Crowley. And later it was a source of the tarot image, the devil, and the Rider Waite design, which is what I have behind me. And so when Anton LaVey established the Church of Satan, you can see the familiar goat's head and the pentagram is seen predominantly in the sigils. And, we have the sigil of Baphomet. Many Satanists, from that, many Satanists have adopted Baphomet as kind of like the metaphorical symbol representing the reconciliation of opposites. And then, of course, you have the statue that Satanic Temple has, which has a lot of those opposing elements, right? You have the two children, you have the half human, half animal. You've got the wings, you've got the pentagram, you've got the the arc of light. And it's kind of didn't start from somebody who identified as a Satanist, but sure has, a long history of others, utilize that symbology. And, it's just kind of become iconic through its use over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've noticed parallels. Maybe it's just completely by chance. Uh, if you've seen depictions of Ganesh,
Hmm.
right? Or, the elephant deity is the head of the elephant, right? Um, Head of the elephant. And he also has a chest, right? Despite being a masculine deity, right? And we have the opposites, right? In one hand, he's offering you a snack. And then, well, here, I'm not doing my, uh, like, he's holding out his hand, right? In one hand. And then he's offering treats in the other, right? He has one foot planted on the ground, one foot in the air, right? One hand, well, he has four hands, but he has a weapon in one and like a musical instrument in the other, right? So I wonder if maybe that's like a Jungian motif, or it's like just kind of intuit, like we intuit it, right? But
Depending on the culture, it seems to me like, depending on the culture and where people are coming from, like utilizing, seeing harmony in, the opposites is kind of a common thing, and how they utilize, and how they decide to represent that can be different.
yeah. And here, this is maybe a little bit over my head. Wasn't Rebellize? I'm not sure who designed that Baphomet image we know.
Depends on the Baphomet image you're thinking of. The one that we utilize and see the most was inspired by the one created by Eliphas Levi, who was a magician, socialist occultist from the 1800s.
Yeah. Yep. Wonderful. And yeah, so with the social maybe outreach with the Satanic Temple, right? There's a lot with Roe v. Wade, like from the documentary, the abortion as like a religious right or something along those lines.
Well, one's bodily autonomy as a religious right, certainly, which extends to things like abortion. I guess it would be good to kind of, since I guess people here are familiar with the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most important things to talk about when it comes to, the activism that a lot of people see and they hear the most about, and of course that was really heavily the topic of the documentary, is first and foremost, the Satanic Temple is a religious organization. We are religious individuals. We are Satanists. And when we engage in activism, whether it has to do with bodily autonomy, whether, religious reproductive rights, or, the separation of church and state, when it either comes to like Baphomet statues, or even when it comes to like after school Satan clubs, things like that. These are all things that we engage in as a way of preserving our religious rights. We have a vested interest in preserving our rights to our bodily autonomy and making our decisions about our bodies based off of the best medical science available. And so when we talk about abortion, we are talking about laws that are being put upon individuals who are capable of bearing children, who these laws are not based in any medical science fact. It is actually interfering with the patient-doctor relationship and the decisions that are made there. And it's a violation of our ability of our autonomy, our ability to make decisions for our own bodies and our, pursuant to our own will. So because these laws are not based in science, and violates that tenet, and it also prohibits us from having bodily autonomy, they are a violation of our religious rights, and we should not be subjected to laws and institutions that make it impossible for us to do so. So yeah, we've had various things that we've done over the years, relating to the topic of abortion, whether that's making waivers for not having to be subjected to waiting periods and having to read state mandated propaganda, which is full of scientific illiteracy. Fetal burial. There's fetal burial laws, forcing us to engage in a religious practice it goes against our religious practice. And then, of course, laws that prohibit us, whether, these 6-week bans or total bans outright. They're a violation of our religious rights. And then, obviously we have a vested interest in, the separation of church and state. But since it's been made very clear that between the activist Supreme Court and those who are currently in positions of authority within our legal system, that erosion, is definitely being chipped away. And so, if one religious body is able to engage in the public sphere and able to be a part of civil life in that regard, everybody should. So again, it's either everybody or nobody. So we certainly don't want to be the ones left out of the conversation. If we are going to blur those lines of church and state, if they're going to allow religions to be present and to give prayer before city council meetings, if they're going to allow religious icons to be put on public property, if they're going to allow this erosion, then they have to allow for everybody to have that voice. And we certainly have a vested interest in making sure our voices are being heard alongside others, because you tend to get forgotten and people forget that you have rights if all you do is just stay in the dark and do nothing and say nothing. So that's kind of at the heart of why, like, our activism is just kind of an extension of our religious faith. It's part of our religious practice, in that we're preserving our ability to freely have religious practice. Yeah. And engage in public sphere, where we're clearly welcome now, since apparently everyone is.
I like to tell people that activism is like 10% of what TST does. A lot of people think we're just spooky activists that have, for no reason whatsoever, decided to overcomplicate our mission by picking a divisive name, which would literally serve nobody. Because we're always asked, wouldn't your job be easier if you didn't use the name Satan? I'm like, well, no, because we're Satanists and we're fighting for our religious rights. We're not activists who have picked some name that would make it harder to accomplish things. So would it be easier? Sure, if that's what we were, but that's not what we are. And just to clarify something, and Shalise, please correct me if I'm wrong on this. This is my understanding. We don't have, abortion for us is not a religious ritual. We have a religious ritual for people who are having abortions to kind of commemorate or help them with the process. And it's voluntary, but it's not like a religious right to have an abortion.
Yeah, it's not so we do have an abortion ritual, and the ritual itself is an affirmation of our engaging in a medical procedure pursuant to keeping in line with our deeply held beliefs. So the ritual itself is just a reflection on, affirming that, the thing you're about to do, whether that's a surgical operation or whether that's just taking a pill, however it is the abortion is performed, is, reciting the tenets to yourself, by my will, my blood, it is done. And, affirming again, I am, this is my will, this is my body, it is my right. And, it's just kind of giving that source of affirmation and comfort. But it is certainly not a requirement of our faith to have an abortion, or even to do the ritual. If if you're somebody who, for me, for example, if I were to obtain an abortion, because I love engaging in ritual when I'm writing ritual for other people. Like my cathartic release and the thing I get out of ritual is when I can write something and, have people be a part of that and they get something. That's where I get the most, that's where I get the most cathartic and just like the deep sense of, what ritual means to me. But I don't personally engage in ritual. I don't have anything in my life or my satanic practice that's considered a ritual. So, I would see getting an abortion as just as cut and dry as, taking your vitamin D supplement in the morning. That's how, if that's what I decided to do. But others find more comfort in the ritual element. So we've made that available to them for something they can do. So, but either way, because it is a religious ritual for us, any law or anything to prohibit us from engaging in that ritual is violating our ability to freely practice our religious faith. Therefore, that's kind of the basis of why we engage in the legal aspect, because we are essentially affirming that, these laws are violating our religious rights, especially ones afforded to us under RFRA. And those are the basis for some of the lawsuits I'm sure people have seen. And lawsuits take a long time. They're, unfortunately not an immediate fix. And, something I think needs to be very made clear, because, with social media being what it is, after Roe v. Wade, a lot of people were going around, particularly on TikTok, saying that if they were to join the Satanic Temple, then that means, you can get an abortion and it's totally fine. We are a sincere religious community with sincerely held beliefs. And, we do have these things, but just because you call yourself a member of TST doesn't guarantee you that, you can just say I'm a member of TST and get your abortion right then and there. That's not how this works. And, even with the lawsuits that we have, there's no guarantee that it'll work. I mean, we've had other lawsuits about other things, like, giving invocations in front of, before city council meetings. And what we have discovered through that process is that we are being made to justify and to, I don't even know how to describe it. We are made to we are held to a different standard than anybody else. Like, take the recent Supreme Court case of the football coach that, absolutely needed to engage in prayer at the 50-yard line, after games, during games. I can't remember what the order was, but he won that case. And at no point did anyone ask him, where in your Bible and your scripture does it say that you have to go to the 50-yard line and have a prayer before a football game? Tell me where that is a part of your actual religious practice and how you're being prohibited from engaging in your religious practice. That was never an issue. Then, so you contrast that with being in court, being asked by, lawyers and judges, like, when it comes to giving, engaging in a public, like a public prayer, or being able to give a prayer before a city council meeting, where in our religious tenets does it say that you have to do that? And if it doesn't, then, it doesn't count, or, it wasn't discrimination, or even with abortion, where in your tenets does it say that you absolutely have to have an abortion to be a Satanist? So when we talk about justice, we have to kind of look at that from what that means, and the fact that we are trying to obtain just a little bit, because there is an unequal application of the law when it comes to Satanists. And so we have to fight twice as hard to get half the rights afforded to us that we should have as religious individuals, as, half the rights that other people don't even have to work hard to have upheld in the same system. So yeah, it's, it's worth doing. The alternative is that we do nothing. The alternative is that we just quietly let all of our rights dissipate, and we don't challenge these things. And we sit there and, scream about how, these things are a violation of our rights, but yet we do nothing. Yeah, it's the harder way to do it. And it's and we've definitely proven that there is a double standard applied to us, but we would not be upholding the true spirit of what makes us Satanist if we didn't defy it. And, whether we do that through activism, whether that's in the courts or whatever it is that we do, where we do that, to not do it, I think would be a violation of our identity and why we call ourselves Satanists. So we'll see how it pans out. We'll see where the lawsuits go, but it's an uphill battle for sure. Insurmountable odds. I mean, I think that's the most appropriate way to describe what we have ahead of us.
I don't think any intellectually honest person at this point believes that there's any sort of equal protection under the law when it comes to religion. I mean, how could you possibly, even now with the Jewish groups that are suing for abortion rights, because it literally is a commandment to have abortions in certain circumstances in Judaism, and it's almost always permissible. And what the lawyers that are fighting against these Jewish groups are doing is they're finding like the most ultra conservative Jewish fringe groups they can, bringing their rabbis in and having them speak on behalf of all Jews to say, oh yeah, no, you see, you can't have abortions, when it's only fringe groups in Judaism who believe that. But since they're the most ultra observant ones there are, they're trying to claim courts run by Christians that those are the only real Jews, and every other Jewish strain, whether it's modern Orthodox, conservative, liberal, reform, they're all fake Jews, which is so anti-Semitic it's beyond words, but it's working in the courts.
Yeah. I didn't know about that under certain variables in Judaism, abortion would be obligatory.
Well, the Bible is very clear, black and white on this, that life begins at first breath. It says so very explicitly in the Old Testament. And so in Judaism, you don't even name a child till the 8th day after it's born, because it's at that point still just sort of like, well, maybe it will live and maybe it won't. But a not yet born fetus or whatever, or someone who's not been born yet, is not considered a life in Judaism. It's possible future life, but the mother is absolutely alive, and there's no question. And the law in Judaism is you protect the life of the living, not the life of potential future life. So if a pregnancy is going to kill a mother, it is mandatory in Judaism of any variety that they have an abortion.
Yeah. I have heard that where you don't say Mazel Tov when someone says that they're pregnant.
That's right.
You say like, here's hoping, or the Hebrew equivalent. Yeah. So yeah, I have heard that. Let's see. Maybe we'll start winding down. Maybe just a few more questions, unless we'll just see how it goes. And if you have anything, burning to say here. This one is a little bit over my head. What is it? Chabad Lubavitch looks really satanic.
Chabad Lubavitch is a Hasidic group.
Okay, they look. I don't know. Do you know what he might be referring to?
I would like some clarity. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, very good. All right, and let's see. Maybe just a few more here. Transhumanism. The relation to Satanism isn't immediately clear with that, but any thoughts on transhumanism as it relates to Satanism?
We've actually had religious services on the topic.
Okay.
Yeah, one of them led by our director of Satanic Ministry. I would say there's no universal belief around transhumanism and Satanism. I think it's, I am absolutely a transhumanist. I would absolutely upload my consciousness into a network or a cybernetic body and live forever and experience everything if I could, learn I could live in infinite lifetimes and never get bored. And if there was a technological way to achieve that, I would be on the first round of what's the term I'm looking for here? Studies or whatever to see if that could be accomplished, even if there was like a negligible chance of success and survival, because I'm that into it. And I've got, I am semi-bionic myself. Charlize was there actually when I had surgeries to install wires and stuff to bypass a spinal cord injury that I have. So for me, this stuff's like already life-changing, and I look forward to seeing where that's going. My only, the only drawback, I think, and I think this was actually covered in the service that I mentioned, is that when you combine transhumanism with capitalism, you end up in a situation of eugenics, where only the richest and most connected people can potentially, live forever, and everyone else can go fuck themselves.
Yeah. Or if you've heard of the movie Repo, right? Kind of along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a child of science fiction. Transhumanism, I think, is something that I've always aspired to and thought was incredible. But yeah, there is that ethical component of transhumanism with the capitalistic, not capital, the capitalism. Mixed with capitalism, I think makes kind of transhumanism, at least the spirit of it and the idea of it, completely moot. So yeah, we have a lot of members who have various stages of bionics implants. Just like Dex would be one of the first test subjects for things like that. All part of our quest for knowledge, our quest of knowing more, pushing science and its boundaries and what it's capable of, and discovering things that were thought to be impossible but now are possible. I think that's satanic as fuck. But yeah, obviously there can be the drawbacks, because we live in certain societies that we live in, and you can't, it's just like, if somebody's not making a profit off of it, then very, inevitably, it might fail. But there are a lot of like underground, it's really interesting, because you've got like the hacker communities, and you have these other underground communities that try to use their knowledge, whether they're surgeons or they're engineers or anything like that. They try to utilize their talents and the things that they know to create access for people that don't have means, or they have, they have a limited budget, or whatever the case may be, to make this available. So yeah, transhumanism could potentially have that, as long as you have the people like that who are contributing to the system, because otherwise, yeah, it just, you leave so many people out, and you become the, it's just like you're just a data set. You're just you become the product in your quest for betterment, enlightenment, or whatever. So yeah, it's interesting topic. Yeah. And a lot of Satanists, yeah, like I said, like there's services, a lot of Satanists, that we know are definitely transhumanists, and we are in our own way. But yeah, there's always that's the problem. Nothing can ever be simple in our discussions. We always have to go to like the upteeth degree of like, okay, so how can this be made terrible, and how do we have to prepare for that?
Yeah, I would sign up for transhumanism. Maybe not the first batch. Maybe after they work the kinks out a little bit.
I'd be in phase 3 clinical trials.
Yeah. My spinal cord implant was actually an experimental, and I had a 1 in 200 chance of being paraplegic afterward, and I just didn't even blink at that. I was just like, yeah, no, I want to fix this thing, and I don't care what the risks are. And they paid me for it, so it was pretty cool. I got
win-win, right?
Yeah. They fixed my injury and gave me a shitload of money.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, maybe here we'll maybe have this be the last question. This is more of a comment. You might enjoy Dr. M. David Litwa's book, Post-Human Transformation in Ancient Mediterranean Thought, if you're into transhumanism. Ask lots of interesting questions. Yeah, so Dr. M. David Litwa, he wrote this book, The Evil Creator, right, on Gnostic thought, and the idea of the demiurge being the bad guy, God being the bad guy, and, transcending that. And he also wrote We Are Being Transformed, which is kind of early theology on, like, the hereafter and whatnot.
Yeah.
But
the last question there actually might be a really interesting one that you could get to quickly.
oh, die and disappear?
Yeah, what happens?
Yeah, I know. It seems a little bit grim. I get the heebie-jeebies thinking about it. But yeah, what are our thoughts on that?
I mean, for me personally, I get the heebie-jeebies, but only because I'm at a point in my life where I still have so much to experience that I really don't want to stop experiencing. But considering how everything has gone, considering that, you know, people are just kind of losing their minds, going insane. And, you know, when I mean that, you know, being more violent and taking out their hatred out on other people. You know, we had the recent attack, arson attack at our headquarters.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah. I think about death a lot more these days, and in a way, even though there was somebody that came to my house intent on killing me, a few years back because they thought I was, teaching Satanism to their children, so I faced death in that situation. I faced death in a couple of different situations, actually, a couple of times, through either that or personal medical things. And but more lately I've been thinking about it, and I don't want to not be alive because I'm not done. I'm not done doing stuff. There's a lot I want to do, and I'll be damned if I'm taken out before I can do those things. But I also think of it as, if I'm put in a situation where somebody's going to make that choice for me, I'm going out kicking and screaming. Like, I will not go quietly. Like, my end will be violent, but on my terms, you know what I mean? And it'll just be, fighting it tooth and nail. But yeah, ceasing to exist is not, I don't think it's a fun concept. It does creep me out a little bit, but at the end of the day, I'm not, like, once I'm gone, I'm not going to know that I'm gone. So, it's one of those things where I think in the process, I'm going to be really fucking pissed about it, but then at the end of it, I'm not going to know any different. So, what does it matter? But, that's kind of my thoughts on it. But I don't know, maybe in like 10 years, I'll feel totally different. Like, I don't know. Certain experiences, living through pandemics, living through, all sorts of experiences will definitely change, what you're, how much you're tethered to the concept of being alive. So we'll see. Yeah. Ask me again in 10 years.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with the not being done yet. Like I said earlier, I could live infinite lifetimes and never get tired of it, even the bad parts. But I don't care either. It doesn't scare me. I don't spend much of any time thinking about it because I'm not dead. So why bother to think about it? And when I am dead, I won't know about it. So who cares? I mean, it's just a non-issue to me. You're alive or you aren't. And so as long as I'm alive, I have nothing to worry about. And when I'm dead, well, then who the hell cares? There's nothing to worry about then either.
Yeah, I've heard what being dead is only painful to those around you, because when you're dead, you don't know that you're dead. And the same is true when you're stupid.
Yeah, it's like, it wasn't terrifying to not be born yet, so why would it be terrifying to not be around anymore?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have no idea what I was doing swimming in my dad's ball sack before this, so maybe I'll be swimming in the ball sack of the ether after. Who knows? Yeah. Now, that's a fun thing about the stupidity thing. Antoine LaVey was very specific about that. The stupidity should be painful. So death should be painful, but stupidity absolutely should be.
He thought that stupidity was the supreme sin in Satanism.
Yeah. And you know what? I absolutely agree.
Yeah, or I guess maybe willful ignorance, right? Like that it's kind of celebrated, like, oh, I just don't understand science, so it's not real. You know what I mean? Like, as opposed to, like, you just don't know anything about a topic. Well, we shouldn't really shame people that are trying. right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that goes to the pursuit of knowledge, right? Like, there's a lot I don't know, but that doesn't inherently make me stupid. It just means, I just don't know that thing yet. But if I'm actively pursuing knowledge, then that's not a bad thing. You're not giving up on your pursuits, and you're not you're not resigned to the bliss of willful ignorance. So, yep. And that, and it can be on any level, when it comes to pursuit of knowledge, it can mean a whole bunch of different things, and it doesn't have to be, big, crazy doctorate level types of things. It can be super simple, and it's still a worthy endeavor.
Yeah. So any thoughts that we didn't touch on, or final thoughts?
I mean, if people are interested in learning more about the Satanic Temple, Satanism in general, we do have a website, thesatanictemple.com. It has a lot of information there. And then, like I said, towards the beginning, we do have SatanCon 2023, April 28th through the 30th in Boston, Massachusetts. So, and it's open to people who are willing to purchase a ticket and go. So, and then of course, Dex and I are findable on various social medias. So, if people have questions about anything we've said or about TST in general, they're more than welcome to reach out.
Yep. It's our emails are just our first names at thesatanictemple.com. I also have a website, dexdesjardins.com. So yeah, we're findable.
Yeah, I'm just on Twitter. I don't like Facebook.
Yeah, I used to be on Twitter, but it seems like maybe it's where you're at. It just seems a lot of arguments.
I have carefully cultivated my existence on Twitter to where I only see nude people, cats, and absurdities. So like that's why I love Twitter, because I was like a fucking surgeon with how I made my existence on there. So I find joy in it, but that's because I created the path of joy for myself, and I love the block buttons. So
Yeah. I left Facebook for a bit, and then when I returned, used the block button liberally too. Yeah, brilliant. So create your own path to joy. That's a good place to finish here. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was interesting, and I'm sure everybody found it interesting too. So if anybody's still, well, clearly there's still people, but if you made it to the end of this video, feel free to like or dislike, right, and subscribe. And thank you so much for coming on.
thank you for having us, and Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Yes, indeed.